Now, I'm sure most of us are very familiar with what was said in this podcast, okay? Bryce Mitchell, Arkansanity podcast. He said some crazy things that got him in some trouble, okay? Some time has gone by. The podcast was taken off of YouTube. However, it was not taken off of Rumble. That's where I see it here. Bryce Mitchell since has made an appearance on the Jaxxon podcast with Rampage Jackson, where he tried to explain where he was coming from, and it was a little bit of a train wreck, and it's actually been taken down. So we're going to take a look at this podcast. We're going to look at a couple of clips that I found on Twitter, and we're going to give a reaction to the Bryce Mitchell deleted Jaxxon podcast appearance. So stick around to hear my thoughts. I'm Wyatt. This is Fight Society. Before we get into the video, guys, please make sure to like, subscribe, drop a comment down below. All that good YouTube stuff really helps me out a lot. If you want access to bonus content like members-only live streams and you want to support the channel even further, become a channel member via the link in the description of this video or the join button on our channel homepage. Thank you very much. Back to the video. Now, many of us are familiar with the Arkansanity podcast that lasted crazy one episode before it was deleted. And Bryce Mitchell, obviously said this right here.
Because I honestly think that Hitler was a good guy based upon my own research.
Anyways, we don't need to go into all of that. I have a whole nother video that was dedicated to this when this happened on my channel, so you can go check that out. We're not going to rehash this podcast. But since then, he has made an appearance on the Jaxxon podcast with Bryce Mitchell. And shout out to Delinquent MMA for snagging these clips before it got deleted. So Bryce Mitchell went on the Jaxxon podcast and things got a little bit heated. Let's see what happened.
Severity of it. I wish I didn't have to talk about it at all, but I feel like the severity of it being this is the first time I've shown my face since I said it. I do want to talk about it. First things first, I said word for word, I do not support, I am not a Nazi. I said it word for word. You can go back and watch it. And
people just clipped up some of the stuff.
I said was a good guy, and then I said, after that, I said before he committed all the atrocities, but they didn't play the whole podcast. Okay, so I did a good guy, but I was saying before he committed.
I'm not going to get too political, and this is an MMA channel, but this is MMA related. But for him to say he was a bad guy after the atrocities he's committed, I listened to that and I'm like, in my opinion, at least, just my opinion, it takes a bad person to commit atrocities. It doesn't make you a bad person because you did them. In my opinion, you did those things because you were a bad person. That's just my take. So even the defense of his stance, saying that Hitler was a good guy before all of those things happened, or before he did all of those things, is a little bit of a nonsensical argument to defend yourself, because he would have had to become a bad person. He would have had to be a bad person to do those things in the first place. That's just me. That's just me.
Did all the atrocities.
Brother, you don't know him, right? You don't know the severity of what he did to the world. Obviously, I could tell you don't know for you to be able to even relaxedly say that word, that he was a good guy. And I'm not even going to give him the benefit of saying his name, but those extremist ideologies, the things he did to millions of people, are some of the most disgusting, most evil things the world ever seen. Now, we're not going to give you a platform today to talk about anything that even remotely supports that.
No,
we're not going to give you a platform.
No, I don't want
to justify what you said. And matter of fact, and me and Rampage talked about this.
It's kind of interesting that they brought him onto the podcast with this being the most recent and biggest headline of Bryce Mitchell's career. So why would they bring him on at all if they weren't going to talk about this? I mean, to be honest, nobody gives a rat's ass about talking about Bryce Mitchell's fighting right now, at least. I'm just saying, I'll let him cook, but let's see. If I was going to bring him on to do this, I personally would have just canceled the show in the first place. I would have gone into this knowing that there was a conversation to be had. But the way that these guys are talking about it, it seems like they got a very stern talking to before they went live. This is Rampage and Bear, I'm saying. I think that whoever is their showrunner, whoever is putting the money behind them in terms of Jaxxon, the chain, it's literally, this is a Jaxxon chain I'm wearing right now. I think that they had a very stern talking to before they went live with Bryce Mitchell.
We're not even going to give you a platform to explain yourself on that. I personally just feel with the things that he did and the millions of people that died, there's no justification pre or post whatever you did say, ain't nobody a good guy. And we as people, and me as a fan of MMA, right? As a fighter, I watch all your fights, right? You bring the Bible in the cage. You did some amazing things before that podcast. Rampage is an icon to me. I look up to Rampage. So when Rampage gets serious, even when he said, listen, man.
Another thing that I want to say here, this conversation that they're having here should have been had off camera, where they could have said, we know Bryce is involved in some pretty serious stuff right now. There's a lot of bad press around his name. We had a conversation about it before we went live. This is an MMA podcast. Let's talk about MMA. And I've seen a couple other creators talking about that as well. And I agree. That's what I would have done. I would have, before we went live, I would have cleared the air. There's clip farming and there's certain things that you can do as part of a podcast or as part of an interview. But with this, it seems like they're doing the opposite because they took the podcast down. If you were going to do this on camera, you should have left the podcast up. Unless the blowback has been so heated towards the Jaxxon podcast that they just said, we got to take it down and move on. I can kind of see that. But as of right now, where I stand right here, I'm not trying to defend anything Bryce Mitchell said, but from what I've seen so far, this seems like a conversation that should have been had over the phone or at the studio off camera before they went live. Just my take.
I got a full-time Jewish chef. And Rampage, the only reason why he was accepting of even doing this podcast, we already had pre-booked you before that show, and we've been trying to get you on for about a year, right? Mm-hmm. And so Rampage said, I want to be able to see him face to face and explain to him the severity of what he did. Right. So at least if you didn't, you do understand what you did damages people's relationships with their family over arguments, damages society, wasting time on things they shouldn't be talking about. We should be coming together as a world, but we should never justify the persecution and the extremism that we've seen in the past from that man or any sort of that nature, right? So
I totally agree, brother. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to say, I literally said,
and he goes right back to saying the shit they told him not to say. Dude, Bryce Mitchell's fucking hilarious, bro.
In my podcast, I don't support.
Yeah.
And I'm not a Nazi. And I said that, and I'm glad that you got to let me repeat that.
How long have you had that podcast?
That was my first episode.
Everybody knows it was the first podcast. I think they're trying to drum up a little bit of conversation, or Rampage is trying to just take the edge off a little bit, because it feels like right now with what Bear is saying, it feels like a dad kind of like bitching out his son. And these are two grown men. I think there was a different way to go about this. Anyways, Rampage seems to be like trying to bring the conversation back down to earth a little bit, because Bear came in super hot.
And here's the thing, guys, is, before he did all of that stuff is what I was talking about, guys.
Yeah,
we
understand. Listen,
I'm not denying anybody's suffering, bro. Like, I'm literally not denying anybody's suffering.
We understand.
But you do know millions of people, over 5 million people died because of him.
A lot of people.
One of the deadliest wars of all time, World War II. Probably over 50 million people, 3 to 5%.
That's one thing that I said too, is even if you take out the whole thing that Bryce, I'm going to be very careful about how I say this, YouTube. The entire thing that Bryce Mitchell references in terms of, a certain group of people, even if you set that one thing aside, which is a crazy thing to set aside, he still caused 25 million soldiers, he was directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of 25 million soldiers, I think, and 15 million civilians, even outside of the group of people that Bryce Mitchell was talking about. So even if you set that aside, which is a crazy thing, there's still 40, 50 million people that directly lost their lives as a result of Hitler causing World War II. Just saying.
Population
deadliest war,
yeah. So you are aware that even trying to justify that, you got to move past that, brother. Right?
No. Listen,
you can't even.
Listen, we understand. We understand it's your first podcast and stuff like that, and what you got to understand about this business right here. You got to be careful what you say, because people will take it out of context and they will clip it.
That's what I believe happened, but I shouldn't have said it in the first place.
Yeah, you shouldn't have said it.
Should have.
That's where you have to be smart, okay? If you're going to talk on camera, Bryce Mitchell treated that podcast like he was just in a conversation with his friend. And you can tell that Bear is trying to give the corporate shut it down all the way type of approach, whereas Rampage Jackson is giving it more of a, look, man, you did some crazy shit. I understand that you think you were taken out of context, but certain things you can't say, regardless of how you phrase it. There's certain things you can't say. Rampage was taking a lot more human approach to it, where Bear, it kind of sounded like you were hearing it was like he was the talking piece for Jaxxon, the company, which I understand they're trying to protect their brand. But here's another piece of the podcast.
You keep saying, if I believe in God. Let me tell you, brother, that's about as backward of a statement as you can make. There ain't no if. I'm telling you right now that I know that Jesus Christ is God, the Son of God. There ain't no if, there ain't no and there ain't no buts. I'm telling you, I know Jesus Christ. I have called on his name, and he has casted demons from my life. I have seen it, and I know. There's no debate there. I know Jesus Christ is Lord. And then from that, everything.
And from that, I would hope that you would know that the most important thing then
is bringing people together.
And
yes,
at the same time, your job is not to pass judgment.
Right. And
to any circumstance or any community.
Right. And,
right.
And
didn't Jesus heal the people who threw stones at him? Didn't Jesus forgive the people who crucified him?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And
so if you have a platform, you have to understand, because my job here today, because I personally was on the fence about doing the podcast. As a fighter, you're phenomenal. The things
personally, that's where I kind of come in here, and I'm like, okay, if you were on the fence and this is how you decided to go about it, you should have just not done it.
You said, I don't even know if I like you anymore. But as a fighter, you're phenomenal, right?
Yeah.
Rampage wanted to do this because he gave me a story. He said his chef is Jewish, and his chef told him, "You can't cancel the podcast, Rampage."
He's my friend. He's my good friend, and he's so happy to know how to cook. He calls him my chef.
All right, guys. So there it is. I mean, honestly, I would have just not done this podcast if they were going to approach it like this. I feel like Rampage did have a little bit better approach than Bear did. But if this was how the start of the podcast was going to go and they end up deleting it, I would have just not done it in the first place. And hear me out. Like, I think this might be like a little bit of a controversial take because in no way do I support what Bryce Mitchell said or anything like that. But I think the way that everybody goes, no, shut up, cancel him, don't let him talk, don't let him do anything, don't let him have a platform. I feel that there's just like better ways to go about it, where it's instead of like shut him up, blah, blah, blah. Like, you guys know, like there's like the crazy guy that lives in your neighborhood, or like the crazy drunk guy. Like, you don't listen to the shit he says, just ignore it. Or you go, Bryce, this is not the way that you should be viewing things. In my opinion, here's a better way to look at it. Because you should be combating bad ideas with good ideas as opposed to just shutting down bad ideas. Because somebody like Bryce Mitchell, if we're being honest, he's not the brightest guy. If you tell him, shut the fuck up, you can't say this, you can't say that, somebody like that is going to get further entrenched in the beliefs they already have. They're like, why are they trying to tell me I can't say this? Why are they trying to tell me I can't say that? And so maybe a little bit controversial, but I actually think that people should show like a slight bit of grace towards Bryce. And as a community, it should be more of like, yo, man, you went out, you said some shit, you can't say shit like that. Let's talk about better ideas. That's just my opinion. I don't think that people should be like, cut him from the UFC. Delete his social media accounts, because I've seen some talk like that. Fortunately, Dana just goes, he's dumb, and that's kind of the way to look at it. But I think you could go even a step further and be like, yo, man, like somebody that he cares about or somebody that cares about him could pull him aside. Fuck it, get him on Rogan. Rogan is the type of show to talk about this type of thing. They tackle political issues, not the Jaxxon Podcast. And that's no diss on Bear or Rampage or Jaxxon. I think they put on a great show. I think they put on a fantastic show, actually. This one wasn't it, though. In my opinion, this one was just not it. I think they could have handled it better. I think they could have just not done the podcast, or they could have had a conversation beforehand, cleared it up right off the bat, and moved on. But in my opinion, as an MMA show, if you don't want to get political, then don't bring on somebody like Bryce Mitchell. So that's my final thought. I feel that there should be less hate towards Bryce Mitchell and a little bit more of like, how do we help this guy out a little bit? And that's kind of just I'm not going to preach too much, but that's my thoughts. This conversation is something that should happen on Rogan. This conversation should not happen on basically an MMA show. Like even me, I have this channel. I have a personal channel that's like non-MMA related. And then I do a podcast that's not MMA related. If I was to talk about something not MMA related, I would do it on a different channel. This is specifically like an MMA related channel. So I wouldn't sit here and go, bang, let's get political now, So anyways, that's my thoughts. Let me know what you guys think down below. Did you catch this podcast before it got deleted? And let me know how you thought the Jaxxon Podcast hosts handled it. So drop a comment down below, like, subscribe. Thank you. Thanks for watching this video, guys. Please make sure to like, subscribe, drop a comment down below. All that good YouTube stuff really helps me out a lot. If you want access to bonus content, become a channel member through the link below this video or the join button on our channel homepage. If you're interested in some non-MMA content from me, go check out my podcast, What's Up Bro, with Wyatt and Bo, linked below this video. Go watch this suggested video, and I'll see you next time.